When one thinks about the early days of film, one tends to think of names like Thomas Edison, the Lumiere brothers, Georges Méliès, Edwin S. Porter, and even D.W. Griffith. But what do all those names have in common? They're all men. You would think there wasn't a woman involved in the film industry until Mary Pickford, and that's just not true. There was a woman. She was there from the very beginning, and her name was Alice Guy Blaché. Alice Guy. She was there from the very beginning. Look, before Alice, the job of a filmmaker was just to point the camera at a person or place, crank the handle till the film ran out, and boom, you had a movie. She created this film in 1896, a film that is often credited as the earliest narrative fiction ever made. It was created less than a year after the Lumiere brothers' first film. This 60-second film is based on an old popular French fairy tale which claims that baby boys are born in cabbages and girls are born in roses. Alice used one real baby and the rest were dolls, and the cabbages were made out of cardboard. She created a set for this film. What she was doing was so revolutionary that years later Barbra Streisand would credit her as inventing the job of a director. Alice Guy is almost always referred to as the first female filmmaker, and she was, but I would go on to say that she was one of the first filmmakers, period, regardless if she was man or woman, but anyway. She was born in 1873, and by the early 1890s, she was living in France. Her father and brother had both passed away, and she was taking care of her elderly mother. It was her mother that told her she should learn to be a typist and stenographer, which were both new fields at the time. In 1894, she applied to be a secretary with a fellow named Leon Gaumont, who was working for a still photography company. When she applied, she was told that she might be too young, and the 21-year-old responded, "I'll get over that." That got a laugh, and she got the job. After the company that Gaumont and Guy worked for went out of business, Gaumont started his own company by buying up all the equipment from the old company, and he focused this new company on the new film industry. Alice started out as a secretary, and Gaumont was busy trying to invent his own movie camera when one day the Lumiere brothers walked in and invited the two of them to see a screening of their first film, workers leaving the Lumiere factory. Alice was excited over this new idea and wanted to make her own film. Now, Alice's father had been a bookseller, so Alice was very well read, and she right away had the idea of telling stories using film. She asked Gaumont if she could make her own film, and he said sure, as long as she kept up with her secretarial duties. So she ended up shooting her first film in her spare time. Her first film, The Cabbage Fairy, in 1896, did so well that her boss put her in charge of all moving picture productions. She was only 24 years old at the time and was still working as a secretary, but as time went on, she did less secretarial work and more filmmaking. Leon Gaumont would open a chain of theaters, often featuring Alice Guy's films. She was the writer, producer, and director of her work and often experimented with all types of genres. Action, comedy, adventure, romance, whatever. She also experimented in special effects at the same time as Georges Méliès. But it's Méliès who's thought of as the father of special effects. So Alice made over 700 films in her 24-year career, including 22 features. No one is really sure how many she made because many of them are lost, probably forever. One of her most successful films was The Birth, the Life, and Death of Jesus Christ, a 33-minute film she made in 1906. To make this film, she used over 25 sets and had over 100 extras. This was unheard of in 1906, and it went on to be one of the biggest hits that French filmmaking had ever seen at the time. In 1907, Alice Guy married Herbert Blanchet, and the two relocated to the United States to open their own movie studio called Solex in Fort Lee, New Jersey. Believe it or not, New Jersey was Hollywood before there was Hollywood. Now, for a while, the studio was very successful. The film I really liked was this one called Fallen Leaves from 1912. It's about a young child who overhears a doctor say that her older sister will be dead of consumption before the last leaves fall to the ground. The little girl takes this literally and sneaks out at night to tie the leaves back on the trees to try to keep her sister alive. The film has a happy ending, so. Now, Alice Guy had one rule for her actors, and it was just 2 words: be natural. Not only did they build the biggest studio in the United States at the time, but the couple also started a family. They had 2 children, a boy and a girl, and everything seemed great, and then everything changed. Things started to go wrong when the marriage between Alice and Herbert began to go south. He was tired of being overshadowed by Alice, and he formed his own company, and then he ran off to Hollywood with a young actress, and she followed him out to Hollywood, but the 2 eventually divorced, and the studio, Solex, was taken away for unpaid taxes, and all its assets were auctioned off. And for a while, Alice Guy became a director for hire, but eventually she left and returned to France with the kids. But in France, she learned that she was no longer relevant as a filmmaker. She returned to the United States and had the same problem here. You see, this is at the time where filmmaking in Hollywood were becoming big business. And once there's big money involved, the men come in, and unfortunately, they push the women aside. Alice Guy Blaché spent the rest of her life watching her work be forgotten. Even her grandchildren didn't realize that their grandmother had been this pioneering filmmaker. In most books about the early days of cinema, she wasn't mentioned, and many times her films were attributed to other filmmakers. She died on March 24, 1968, at the age of 94. She had spent the later years of her life trying to locate her lost films and writing her memoirs. Those were published in 1986. The problem with locating her lost films are that these were made in the days before credits were part of the film, so they might be out there, it's just hard to know. Anyway, there's a lot more to Alice's story, and I'll have a link to a good documentary on YouTube below, and also there's a film that was released just last year about her life. Oh, by the way, in 2013, a new Kickstarter campaign was begun by Pamela Green and Jarek Van Sluges. They were hoping to make a film called Be Natural, The Untold Story of Alice Guy Blaché. This started a whole new interest in Alice and her work, and many of her films have turned up since then, but it's still only a small fraction of the films she made. The documentary was released in 2016, but I still have yet to see it.